Hello, it's Ryan here with Hobbies and Man once again, and today we are doing a book review. We're going to be looking at Second Chance Swordsman by Jakob Tanner. This is a self-published work via Amazon, although you might be able to get it on Jakob Tanner's website. I'm not really sure, I haven't checked, but it might be possible, although honestly just go through Amazon. I think that's probably the easiest. The demographic for this is like YA, like 13 through 18. The main character is 16 years old. And more or less the situations that occur in the book are all within that age range. So I think it's pretty accessible for just about everyone, right? So yeah, the genres here are lit RPG. This is a lit RPG story. At least that's what the title says. It's also a reincarnation / time travel story. The time travel aspect is reincarnating into his old body. And of course, it's a fantasy story because this happens in a medieval-esque world. Although they do have kind of like anachronistic situations or things. Like sometimes the way that characters talk feel a little bit too modern for my taste. Mostly just because it's like expressions that like you'd expect like a dude bro to say. But it's like an elf that says it, right? Which can work. I don't think it worked in this case. And sometimes, like, the weapons that can be created via, the magic in this world feel way too modern for the setting, right? But I don't really want to spoil it, so I'll leave it at that for that part of the of that story, right? So yeah, adaptations-wise, it does not have one, but because this is so similar feeling in my case to things like Soul Leveling or Faraway Paladin, I would honestly like to see it like in a comic book format, but I think that that's not really viable for self-published authors currently. But if it ever becomes viable for Jakob Tanner to turn any of his series into a comic book or anime or animated project, I think this one would probably be the best one. The Tower Climber is good, but I feel like that one has a lot more competition in terms of like dungeon busting series than Second Chance Swordsman would against other things that are kind of more similar to it, right? So, yeah, ratings-wise, it's a 4 out of 5. I found it to be really enjoyable, but the problem was that at the early parts of the story dragged a bit too much for me. I feel like the segment at the beginning of the story after he returned dragged a little bit too much for my taste, and so that made it difficult to kind of fully enjoy the story because it didn't really give me that kind of enjoyment right off the bat. It's also why I took so long to read this, even though this was given to me about a year ago. So yeah, premise-wise, Sam is a warrior in an unwinnable battle. There's this kind of like invasion, or maybe it's kind of like basically a medieval world war of some sorts. I can't remember what the point of the war was or why it was happening, but I just remember it was a war. And he dies. And he meets a goddess, and he's tasked with trying to redo his life from the age of 16, right before basically his life turned from what it was going to be into what it became. And he has this opportunity to change the future. So he, has to do this. And that's why he's the second chance swordsman, because ultimately he is, sword guy with a second chance. So yeah, it's pretty good. The premise seems simple, but it actually is a very well thought out story. I did really enjoy it. Plotline wise, first of all, this book is long. It's about 660 pages according to Amazon. And I generally would say that you don't really feel the length of the book, except for the first 100 pages. Now, this might not be a situation that occurs to everyone. I think it was mostly a personal situation that occurred because at the time I started reading this, I feel like I was also reading a lot of other reincarnation / isekai / time travel type stories. They kind of had the same vibe going for them, where it was just a lot of grinding, right? And most of the time, that's kind of the equivalent to epic fantasy type stories where they just spend the first 100 pages just setting the world for you as your character moves through the world, right? It's kind of the same idea, but there's a certain level of roteness to the grinding of the earliest stages of gamelit or lit RPG type stories that at the time I read this, I didn't feel was very enjoyable. So The first 100 pages felt a bit long to me, but after that was pretty good. So let's look at the actual plot points. So first, we get introduced to Sam in a battle. I think he's doing something, and he kills, he like mercy kills someone, if I remember correctly, because this beginning part of the story I read a long time ago, and then I came back to this book about 3 or 4 days ago, and I started reading it from 20% onwards. Even though I had already read up to 40%, I decided to go back 20% of the story through and just reread it from that point. You know, kind of where I was well situated in the story, but it wasn't like far ahead, right? So, yeah. So Sam gets introduced, and then he dies, and then he meets a goddess, and he's given the chance to return, and so he does. And now he basically spends the whole time that he's returned before the first incident, which is when he and his friends get thrown into a white gate, which allows him to awaken his powers in the first time he lived his life. He basically spends that whole time training, first by himself, to develop his skills, because he was reborn with the original skill that he got initially, but he had the opportunity to get a second skill the second time that he goes through the white gate, but his first skill was kind of demoted a lot. So he basically had to start from scratch, rebuild all of his skill points, or as many as he could. And once he got to a certain level, I think once he got to 10 points per stat, he decided to teach his friends how to fight and teach the children that he was with how to fight as well. And then, you know, it's a lot of time spent on this, and, you know, some little side adventures here and there. Like, they go find a cow that gives them a lot of milk, which helps them grow stronger and stuff like that. And then eventually they do end up get thrown into the white gate. Once they're there, Sam basically has to act as quickly as possible to avoid the situation that happened before. And so he murders someone, and his friends have like a negative reaction to this, of course, because they didn't expect him to do that. Eventually, he manages to calm them down. He tells them what's going on, and he leads his friends away from all of the other people that were also thrown through the gate as they're being attacked by these raven things. And eventually, he manages to make his friends go into a cave, kind of stay there while he does a few side quests in order to get some special armor and some special tools that he really wanted to get at his disposal, right? So he does this, and eventually he gets back to his friends, and then they exit the white gate, and Sam exits first. He gets a second ability, which is basically more or less the Shadow Monarch ability, kind of analog. Like, so it's not exactly the same as Solo Leveling's Shadow Monarch ability, but it's pretty similar. It's basically like the Death Knight or Death King or something like that. I don't remember what it's called, but basically it allows them to take advantage of the chaos of battle, specifically through lighting things on fire based on blood. And it actually works really, really well for him, which is really awesome. And then he exits the gate. He kills all of the priests that are there because they're basically the evil organization of this world. And then he gets all of his friends together, and they go to the Travelers Guild to seek asylum. Once there, Sam manages to convince the guild leader to allow him and his team and his friends to become travelers. And then basically there's more training, and then he befriends the secondary characters, which are Olivia, who I think is an elf lady of some sort, and no, actually I think she's human, actually, plus her two buddies Curtis and Brock, who are an elf and a dwarf respectively. And of course they have this basically sibling rivalry kind of feeling to them, which is pretty fun. And then he decides to try to get promoted. He wants to develop his skills a lot more, so he keeps training. Eventually, he gets permission to go to the Winter Ball, which is basically when the proper story starts. Essentially, the first major situation that happens in his life after he got his powers and everyone died in his original timeline was the assassination attempt on the Princess Alice. And so the first assassination attempt occurs at Winter Ball. And so once he's able to go there, he and all of the other travelers that he goes with manage to stop this assassination attempt. and even managed to save someone that originally they weren't planning on saving, which is great. And then we get kind of a lot of time in between these two events, right? So the first assassination attempt is foiled by Sam. And then a bunch of stuff happens in between with some kind of like, cloak and dagger type stuff, which is pretty fun. And eventually the next assassination attempt happens, which leads into the massive battle at the Festival of the Spring. That is basically the climax of the story. And it's really, really good. I really enjoyed, the back half of this book a lot. I read it really fast. I had no problems with consuming this once I got over the initial kind of like slog of the grinding. And I don't know why this happens, because the other Jakob Tanner book that I've read, The Tower Climber, I didn't find the grinding in that one to be that boring. And I wouldn't really say that it was boring in this book. It's just, it wasn't really my cup of tea the way it was set up, because I wasn't enjoying myself while I was reading that aspect of it in the initial time that I read it. When I came back and kind of got through it again, I feel like I was in a much better like headspace to enjoy that kind of stuff, because I do enjoy it generally, right? Like I read a lot of reincarnation type isekais, and all of them have these aspects, and I wouldn't read them if I didn't enjoy that. But something about the way that this was initially written didn't work for me, and then when I came back to it, it worked much better. So characters-wise, we have a few different ones. We have Sam and his two buddies, Toby and I want to say Clara or Katie. I honestly don't remember her name, but she is kind of like his best friend, and Toby is also his best friend. It's kind of like a Harry, Hermione, and Ron type situation there. It initially sets up like a love triangle situation, but that kind of disappears quite quickly, which is great, because Sam just is not interested in that, because he's trying to save the world, which works. Then there's the Guildmaster, Olivia, Curtis, and Brock. Then there is Mildred and Alice. Mildred is Alice's handmaiden. She also happens to be a very badass lady. I like her a lot. And then there's the two main bad guys, which are this court guy, this court advisor guy. I don't remember his name, but he's basically like Emperor Palpatine. The way he does things is pretty Emperor-esque. It's funny. Like I can just imagine him yelling ultimate power or whatever, and just like which I don't know. I just think that guy it looks a lot like Palpatine, or feels a lot like Palpatine, and it kind of works for me. And then there's Spectral Church leader Balin, who kind of has that vibe as well, actually. Both of them kind of just feel like Palpatine-esque bad guys, or like Palpatine and Snoke or something like that. And I quite like them. I think they're very good bad guys. But some aspects of the Spectral Church didn't really work for me. So let's talk about the world building here. Generally, it's a medieval world. It's called Westria, I think. And the country that they're in is called Volsungrad or something like that. And basically, the city is controlled by three different powers: the nobles, or / the crown, and then the church, the Spectral Church, and then the Travelers Guild. And the Travelers Guild and the Spectral Church are always at odds, because the church wanted sole control of Traveler, recruits. But they weren't able to secure that initially, because the guy that's in charge of the Travelers Guild managed to set it up. It's kind of like Gungi Ho in Solo Leveling, right? So he's basically the only guy that stepped up. He also happens to be the guy that has the best mana in the whole city or country, and he's always at odds with the guy that runs the church, right? And travelers are basically this world's version of hunters, or spelunkers, or adventurers, or whatever you want to call them, right? So, yeah. The thing with the church that doesn't work for me is that they're more or less just evil for the sake of evil. And it might be that it was explained early on, but I don't feel the explanation was important enough for me to remember it, so that kind of doesn't work, right? And generally speaking, I don't mind fully evil organizations for the sake of being evil. The problem is that, like, if they're this evil, how did they manage to remain, powerful for however long it's been since, the dungeon gates started appearing, right? Because, if the Crown and the Travelers Guild know that these guys are so fucking horrible, why would they let them be, right? It felt a little bit too contrived that this, like, fully evil organization existed kind of basically out in the open. And, it might be that I'm not really understanding what was said about this church that well, and that's totally fine. Like, I understand that sometimes I'm not going to understand the way that things are explained to me, and that's just how it goes, right? But for me, it didn't really work. I felt a bit too contrived. So I don't really love the fact that they're completely evil, but I understand that for, like, the sake of the story, that's just kind of have to happen. And I just feel like it needed a little bit more... it needed to be less vague why this was possible. It should have been a bit more concrete, right? Because I understand that, like, in the original timeline, they were fully evil because they had power. But in this timeline, or in the, the returned timeline, it doesn't fully make sense why they're that way, right? So that's just a me thing. It might be that it was explained and I didn't get it, and I that is totally a fair assumption or a fair kind of criticism of my review, right? So, yeah. In terms of art and fan service, there is no artwork. Fan service wise, I guess there's, like, references to Tanner himself. Like, there is this scribe that is writing the story of the Second Chance Swordsman at the very end of the book. So that is, like, fan service in the way that, like, it appeals to fans. But when I use fan service as, a term, I usually mean raunchy stuff, and there really is none here. However, there is a little secondary, like, alternative ending / epilogue where there is a scene that is a little bit kind of raunchy. It's not really raunchy, but it does kind of give you that vibe of, like, an anime beach episode, where, they have that scene where they show off all the girls in their outfits. And that was pretty good. And you get it with the book. So, it's not exactly part of the book, but it's kind of connected to the story, right? So, there's kind of an element of, oh God, this girl's so hot kind of like situation that happens in the book, but they're very minimal, and they're really not going to be, like, egregious. They're just going to be very tasteful and kind of scattered throughout the book. So they are there, sometimes. In terms of a rating, this is a 4 out of 5, like I said, because the first part was a slog. And that's really all there is to it, because I've already mentioned it a few times throughout all of the rest of the review, so there really isn't too much more to say about that. And yeah, if Tanner decides to make another book of this, I would be very happy to read it. But I do think he basically made it, like, viably a one-time type of book, where, like, the story can continue, but if it doesn't, there's a very satisfying conclusion, and it's good. And I liked it, and I enjoyed it, and I had fun with it. It's nice that it's a long book, because sometimes, these books tend to be really short, and because they're so easy to read, they kind of even go by faster than, you would expect them to. So the fact that it's a big, girthy book is good, but, like I said, the little elements here at the beginning of the story didn't really work for me, and so it made it a little bit difficult for me to get into, but I do recommend you guys give it, a go, have some patience with it, and eventually it will get really, really enjoyable. So, yeah, that's it for Second Chance Swordsman. I hope you guys enjoyed the review. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know what you thought. And thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.